Train Gus, or better known as just Gus, is one of, if not the, most recognisable pirates in Sea of Thieves. In this video, I'm going to recount Gus's very interesting life, as well as diving into a new alleged dark side which hasn't really been talked about publicly. Gus was born in 1987, making him 38 today. He was born into a loving family which consisted of his mum, dad, and later on, a younger brother. Gus's family was not the wealthiest, but also not poor. They got by pretty well, and Gus had a pretty normal upbringing. Not really much is known about his childhood, but definitely nothing extravagant happened, and he just sort of lived a normal life. Gus's story really begins when he starts working with a Sea of Thieves content creator named Theb. Theb is one of the biggest Sea of Thieves content creators to this day, and him and Gus go way back. The first appearance of Gus was in one of Theb's videos, all the way back in September 2020. This video was just a little silly video of Gus dancing around holding a bucket. Back then, Theb's videos were normally quite short, this one being only 38 seconds. But it does a good job at introducing Gus to the audience. He has a very recognisable look, and is very easy to identify by his signature lock and key tattoo. Gus would continue working with Theb and be a big part of his YouTube channel, even posing in the profile picture back when he had 100 subscribers. He still is the profile picture today, which really just reiterates how close of friends Theb and Gus were and still are to this day. There was even a very famous acronym that went around at the time. Gus stood for Gus under Sot, which was sort of a play on words. It was meaning that Gus was literally under the game, propping it up. He was the one that was keeping Sot alive. This was shared throughout the community and everybody agreed with it. Theb and Gus were themselves bringing in hundreds and thousands and millions of eyes onto Sea of Thieves, and whether it was sort of admitted or not, they were really propping up the game and keeping it alive, which is what Gus stood for. Gus and Theb really got along and their personalities were quite similar. Theb was really good at Sea of Thieves, he was a prevalent double gunner, and so was Gus. Theb was also known for funny launching and utilising exploits, and Gus was on board just as much. He loved funny launching, and really just moulded into the perfect friend for Theb. Gus would feature in every single Theb video for a long time, a few years in fact, until Theb hit a sort of rough patch where he was getting banned constantly. I'm not going to get into these bans because this isn't a video about Theb, it's a video about Gus, but this led to Gus pretty much just disappearing. One day, Theb was recording videos on a new account with a different pirate. When this happened, the community was very disheartened. Gus was a much-loved character and it was sad to not see him in the Theb videos anymore, and people were wondering what happened to him. At the start, the main hypothesis was just that Gus was sort of taking a break. Gus had been working with Theb for a long time and maybe he was just having a break. Although it was weird that nothing was announced and he kind of just disappeared. A few months went by and still Gus had not shown up, though during this time Theb had also not settled on working with any other pirates consistently. He continuously was changing accounts and changing pirates, and there wasn't really another solid character that worked with Theb. But during this period, another Sea of Thieves creator named Crud started consistently working with Theb, almost to step in and fill the role that Gus was no longer filling. The only difference with this is that Gus was always seen as sort of Theb's equal. They were on the same page in all the videos. Theb and Gus were the main people, and Crud was sort of the side character or sidekick, almost like Theb was Batman and Crud was Robin. When Gus left, this dynamic didn't really change immediately. Crud was still the obvious side character and wasn't ever really the main topic of these videos. He would drive the boat around and repair, while Theb was actually out doing stuff and getting content. But the longer that Theb and Crud were together without Gus, the more Crud started to become less of a side character and more of an equal with Theb. Theb continued working with Crud, streaming a whole lot multiple times a week and making many videos with Crud and just these random pirate characters which were coming and going with new accounts. Everything was going good. Yes, it wasn't as fun not having Gus around in the videos, but Theb was doing well, Crud was doing well, and the community didn't seem to mind too much. This was until the 22nd of July 2024, when Theb released this video.
What's up everyone? So some of you may have noticed that my YouTube channel has been missing for the last 24 days. This is due to 3 consecutive copy strikes from Rare to my YouTube channel.
Again, I'm not going to get into this too much because this is a video about Gus, not Theb. But Theb had received some pretty big attacks and was at risk of losing a lot, including his Twitch and YouTube channel and all accounts. Luckily, this was resolved with the help of Crud and other members of the community, and it actually, in turn, led to some good stuff happening. Theb was no longer getting his accounts constantly banned, which meant he could start working with pirates long term again like he did with Gus. This led to everyone wondering if Gus was going to come back, and again asking the question if Gus was maybe even still alive. What's happened to him for all these years? Where has he been? Why did he actually leave in the first place? These were all questions that had not been answered. Everyone was starting to get excited that maybe Gus would now be coming back, and when he didn't, people started thinking the worst. Maybe something bad happened to him. Maybe there was a reason he's been gone for this long and nothing's really been said about him. While Gus didn't come back to working with Theb, a different pirate did. This pirate went by the name of Blingo Bogo, and obviously was trying to replicate the same sort of role that Gus filled. He would often do goofy stuff in the videos and try and sort of get back those golden times that Theb and Crud had with Gus. And he did alright, although it was prevalent that he was sort of trying too hard to be like Gus and he wasn't Gus. He stuck around for a while and people were starting to enjoy him and wonder if maybe this will just be the new pirate that Theb works with and this will be the sort of new Gus. Right around these Blingo Bogo times, the Crud launch came out, and along with the Crud launch, this brought in heaps of players and eyes onto Sea of Thieves. More people were playing the game and coming back to the game because of the Crud launch. If you don't remember what the Crud launch was, you could use the fishing rod and this weird glitch to control your momentum when you shot out of a cannon. You'd be able to shoot maybe, I don't even know, 3 or 4 times further, plus be able to pick the direction you move. So it just made boarding heaps easier, it made it way harder to run from people, and it was just making the game more fun and playable for a lot of people. Now you might have noticed that this launch was named after Crud, and started really cementing Crud as less of just Theb's sidekick, but actually his own person with his own personality. Sea of Thieves really wanted to patch the Crud launch, and they went about patching it as quickly as they could. Now of course this led to other versions being found and other glitches coming up, one of them being evil mode. Now at the time, nobody knew this, but with hindsight we now know that Gus actually added this into the game to let Theb know that he was still alive and needed Theb's help to come and save him. To explain this, I'll first have to explain what evil mode actually was, and I made a video on this back when it happened, not knowing that this was actually Gus orchestrating this whole thing. Evil mode involved similar things to the Crud launch, and it's interesting that Gus decided to use a similar exploit to Crud launch to get Theb's attention. Maybe he knew that Theb was paying attention to these exploits and was always one to attempt them, as he would know that about Theb because they worked together for so long. But anyway, this involved dying, going to the Ferry of the Damned, while pretty much standing by the Ferry of the Damned cannon and jumping off. It was a very weird exploit and didn't really help you in any way like the Crud launch, but it just used the fishing rod much like the Crud launch did. But when done correctly, it allowed you to jump off the Ferry of the Damned and fall down under the map. Falling under the map. Does that sound a little familiar? Gus under Sot. He had added this in, knowing Theb would attempt it, and knowing that Theb would remember the acronym Gus under Sot, and realise that Gus was still alive and needed finding. Not really anyone else in the community picked this up at the time, but Theb did, because he was really Gus's closest friend ever. He immediately began the search for Gus, knowing that he was still alive. He called on the community to also help look, but it was really Theb leading the search and Theb getting the closest. This is a tweet here of Theb finding one of Gus's cousins, showing that he was getting really close and probably interviewing Gus's family members to see if anyone had any information on him. Somebody else actually found Gus's little brother, who looks a lot like Gus, but when you see his whole body, you can tell that he's not quite as out of shape as Gus is, and doesn't have the signature lock and key tattoo. Although all of these family members didn't know where Gus was either, it led to the search continuing, and Theb trying his hardest to find Gus. People were still debating if Gus was going to be found, although Theb seemed pretty confident that he was going to get there eventually, and that Gus was still alive. But all these debates would end on March 28th, 2025, just earlier this year, when Theb released a video titled Train Gus Returns.
Hey guys.
This video was insane for the Sea of Thieves community. Gus had returned and was again working with Theb. He was still alive. Crud also featured in this video, and they all seemed to be getting along just like old times. It was wild. There were so many questions being asked. Where was Gus for this whole time? How was he found? And not much was really being given out. It was obvious that both Gus and Theb were sort of keeping quiet of how he came back and where he had been. It's obvious that Theb had found him, but it did just leave more questions than answers. Crud, who was also in these videos and presumably knew quite a lot about how Gus had made his way back, also wasn't really giving any information out. This led to people constructing theories, and one of them recently has some pretty decent evidence to back it up. This theory is a little dark and explains why Gus disappeared and involves someone that no one would really suspect. Crud. That's right, there is a pretty strong theory at the moment that Crud had orchestrated Gus's disappearance. Immediately, the question is why? Well, when Gus, Theb and Crud were working together, Crud was the obvious side character and was becoming more and more of a background character in Theb's videos. It's not hard to imagine that he started getting jealous and maybe even worried that Theb and Gus would split off and leave Crud. Crud made his own content, but working with Theb and Gus only helped everyone and was beneficial for him. If they were going to potentially move away from working with him, that would be a big hit. So the theory proposes that Crud somehow organised Gus's disappearance. If he wanted him dead, or if he just wanted him out of the picture, it's kind of unknown. Up until recently, there was no evidence for this. It was just a theory that hadn't been confirmed or denied by anyone, although some good evidence has been found. On July 27th, 2024, Crud streamed with Theb, as usual. This is nothing out of the ordinary, and this was during the time where Theb was working with many different pirates. The one in this stream is just some random guy that Theb was working with for probably a few weeks until he moved on to a different pirate. Although during this stream there was a very interesting clip which I will show you now. It was just a few days after that Gus's family portrait was added to the game. Obviously this is baby Gus in the picture, although at the time it wasn't really known that this was Gus. Obviously Theb knew it was, but it wasn't really out there in the community that this was Gus, and the photo wasn't titled as Gus's family picture in the game, so there wasn't really any way for people to know unless they had been told. This led to a really awkward interaction happening on the stream. Crud had just unlocked this brand new trinket, which was the picture, and he wanted to show it to Theb. So he goes onto his boat and he replaces another trinket with this one, putting it on a shelf, and I will let the rest of the video play out.
Alright, so there's like, they didn't even mention it, but there's new journals and stuff, right? And dude, check out this sick trinket you get. Hang on, let me apply it. Ugly ass sot baby. Bro, why is there an ugly ass sot baby?
Vote on the fucking thing. We discussed Fielly shit because you took too long.
So as you can see, this is a pretty awkward moment for Theb. Everybody watching the stream didn't know what was going on. I presume that the majority of people just think that this is a random baby and Crud was just joking around calling some random baby ugly. And it's not even clear if Crud knew at the time that that is baby Gus, but Theb knew. And you can tell that Theb immediately gets uncomfortable. After Crud calls him ugly, Theb quickly tries to change the subject by telling Crud to go vote on a voyage. Crud then continues to insult this baby. Now, it's hard to tell if Crud at the time knew this was baby Gus. If he did know it was baby Gus, he's kind of just taking this as an opportunity to publicly insult baby Gus in front of everybody watching the stream and Theb. If he didn't know this was baby Gus, he's just having a joke insulting this random ugly baby. Either way, this is a tricky situation for Theb, and Theb doesn't want to let on that that is baby Gus. Because if Crud doesn't know, he doesn't want to tell him, and if Crud does know, it'll just make it weird saying, hey, that's baby Gus, why are you being mean to him? So Theb just kind of lets it slide, and Crud does continue to insult the baby for the next few minutes, until eventually Theb steps in.
I'd be crying if I look like that too, bro. I am gonna hold it against you. What the fuck is that ugly baby trinket, bro? Dude, it's the iconic sot ugly baby trinket.
Can't say that about something.
About something.
You might have noticed that Theb says you can't say that about something. Instead of calling the baby either a ugly baby or baby Gus or Gus, he calls it something. At a glance, that kind of seems weird that he didn't call it by a name, But it makes sense when you think about it. He doesn't really want to just call it an ugly baby because obviously that's his friend Gus. But he also doesn't want to call it Gus because that would lead on to Crud that is baby Gus. So he's having a bit of a conflict in his mind and just accidentally says something. You notice Crud immediately picks up on this and goes, something, what do you mean? And maybe this is the moment that it kind of clicked for Crud and he realized that was baby Gus. Or maybe he knew all along and he's just realized that Theb's kind of caught on that he was trying to insult Gus. So that's the evidence that has kind of come out about maybe Crud did have something to do with Gus's disappearance. It creates the question of why isn't Gus now coming out and saying that, hey, Crud orchestrated my disappearance? Why has he just kind of gone back to working with him? Well, it might not be that easy. Crud probably didn't personally make Gus disappear. He could have hired people to do it, or he could have just had some sort of play in it. So it would be kind of weird for Gus to just come out without any evidence. So possibly he is continuing to work with Theb and Crud and build a relationship until he has everything in order, and then he will release some sort of statement about what caused his disappearance and where he was, and even how he got back into working with Theb. There also is a good chance that Crud has nothing to do with it and it may be something completely different, which also just hasn't come out yet. Now, to this day, Theb, Crud, and Gus still stream and make videos, so there is a chance that you could catch them on a stream together, and people obviously do ask about this in the chat, but normally questions just get avoided and don't really get answers by Crud, Theb, or Gus. None of them seem to really want to talk about it, which doesn't really mean anything. It just means Gus doesn't really want to talk about it publicly yet, but hopefully he will do soon. Well, that's it. That's the history of Gus up until the present. Hopefully he's having a good time working with Theb again. I think the community is enjoying it that he is back, and hopefully he sticks around and doesn't have any more trouble. But that's all I have to talk about, so I'll see you guys around.